Hi. Okay. So, this one was a little rough, dude. um, yeah, there's a lot of ethical issues, ethical and moral issues like homophobia and domestic violence and rape and statutory rape and suicide. They're like, good God. I mean, okay, so Streetcar Named Desire is fairly popular, not just in the theater world, but in the film world and in the world of literature. So like, I've heard of this show since I was in middle school, but I hadn't ever actually sat down and read the play, and wee, it's a little, it's a little rough. Yeah, so that all being said, there were a number of moral and ethical issues present in the play that I thought were, progressive to talk about at that point in time, but nonetheless. So Tennessee Williams is extremely descriptive in the way that he writes. We're just coming off of Mother Courage, so not to say that he didn't describe things that were going on, but in talking about set description, holy crap, this was extensive. Oh, she's stretching. So she's groaning. So yeah, because it was very difficult for me to read Mother Courage, just because I have a difficult time with reading plays that are, dialogue heavy, like, Shakespeare. It's just difficult to read Shakespeare without reading it out loud with other people. And we don't have that benefit currently at present. So I had a difficult time reading that play. I had to actively read the show, and with this show, it was like reading a novel. And so it was actually really easy to read. I kind of blew through it a lot quicker than I thought I would. That being said, that the whole reason for that is because he is so descriptive with his descriptions of sound and set and lights and everything, and characterizations. Well, character, mannerisms and things. Like he would describe in 10 lines how Blanche set a cup on the table, and the exact precise her finger tapped on it as she set it down, and he was very extensive with all that stuff, which I thought was a very major difference compared to what we've been reading. But yeah, so in that being said, before the play even began, oh god, there's a wasp. He go away. He set up the scene in like 3 paragraphs, and in those 3 paragraphs, he already distinguished several different elements and themes to be continued later on in the play. This idea of exterior versus interior, integration of classes and colors, and this idea of music. Oh my god, we talked about music in Mother Courage. This is something else, but yeah, so I thought that was interesting, the way he just immediately went in, throwing in symbolism and everything in the first set description. So actually getting into the characters, how are they alike and different? Well, so the first thought that comes to mind is the contrast between Blanche and Stanley. If I could describe them in animal terms, I'm not in advanced movement, but I do like to characterize people in plays through animals because it's just an easy way to figure that out and distinguish them. Stanley would probably be, for me at least, a beat up old street cat. With a lot of scars, missing a chunk out of his ear. That kind of cat. Cat that's real dirty and stinky and bestial and feral. All those things can be really sweet to you one moment, and then take a chunk out of your hand in the next. I believe even in his character description that Williams wrote, described him as bestial. There was also an interesting thing that he wrote about him that I thought was icky, but relevant. Since earliest manhood, the center of his life has been with pleasure of women, the giving and the taking of it. Ouch. But yeah, so I think he'd probably be a street cat. He's very earthy, very gritty, very primal and physical and rough. And then you have Blanche, who is very light and airy and romantic. And so I see her more as like this long-necked bird. I don't know why. But something that looks very elegant and sweet and makes a lot of noise. A lot of unnecessary noise to cover up something else. And so in saying that, I think there is a very huge difference between the two. The way they handle things, he is very much direct, and if he is hungry, he will say, I am hungry, versus Blanche, who is very, I almost said something bad, very, if she wanted to say I'm hungry, she'd write a whole dang novel about it, that kind of person. There's a very distinguished difference between the two. But in saying that, I think both of them are alike in one way, and that involves Stella. I see Stella as more of a mouse, something that both a cat and a bird would hunt after, that would manipulate and hurt. Because I think the thing that links both of these two opposing characters is their manipulation and bullying of Stella. Because I think they both need something. They need a scapegoat. And Stella, bless her heart, is that scapegoat. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that they are similar in. They like to manipulate people, and they like to be in control of how people perceive them. Why is the relationship between Stanley and Blanche so turbulent? I think I'll just say that. They are just two different, they're rooted in two different things. I think he's rooted in reality, and she is rooted in illusion, and I'll discuss that a little bit further, but that's one of the primary reasons they are so different and their relationship is so rocky. So what's the difference between Blanche and Stella? I think, though they were raised in the same house, they're just two different women. I think Blanche is a lot more assertive than Stella is. I think she also has a different view about men. And let me rephrase that. I think they both depend on men. I think they just view that dependence differently. So that was a large, I guess, moving away a little bit from characters and more into themes. That was a large theme in the play for me, was this dependence on men, which I thought was interesting that Tennessee Williams included that and took such a negative criticism of it. Because both of these women are immensely dependent on men, even though Blanche, very much is against, the violence that Stanley inflicts upon Stella. I think that, it's evident that she's still dependent on men, because immediately after that interaction, what does she do? She tries to come up with a way to get Step, or whatever his name was, to help them. So her first gut reaction was, I'm going to go to a different man to help us. So she's still dependent on men, and she looks to Mitch to try to pull her out of her current situation. That's one of the themes that I thought was pretty evident in the play. Another was this idea of death, or better phrased, fear of death. Blanche is terrified of getting old, which is interesting. She just consistently throughout the play, she depends on the affection and admiration of others, because she is so frightened of getting old and so frightened of saying her real age and covering all that up. This idea of sex also, in addition to death, is pretty evident. She preys on young men to make her feel younger. And she feels like if she found herself a young man to love her, she would never get old. Whatever. So yeah, that goes into the icky. This is, yeah. So moving into, and that plays into where was it? Oh, can you justify Stanley's world and can you justify Blanche's world? No, because of all the reasons I already said. Stanley is this violent, vulgar man, and Blanche, even though, I felt pity for her at several moments throughout the play, she's not a good person. She preys on young men. She I'm assuming had sex with a 17-year-old, and that's rape. I don't know what the age of consent was back in the day, but if she was a teacher and he was a student, that's not okay. So she's not a little, pure thing either. So no, I can't justify either of their worlds because it's just, they're both awful. So yeah, no, I don't think either of their views are superior. Class plays a really large part of the text, especially between Blanche and Stanley, but that ends up being obviously dissolved. So this play emphasizes the difference between illusion and reality consistently throughout. For example, just in the characters, Stanley is very realistic, Blanche is very dreamy, and she lives in this fantasy that she is a good person and above all else, and that's this idea of reality versus fantasy is pretty, it's made concrete in those characters, and additionally in the way that Tennessee Williams set up the set. This idea of exterior versus interior. Inside the apartment, everything is clean, and she has tried to dim the lights and make everything masked and make it more appropriate for her, versus the exterior, which is gritty and real and harsh. And in the climactic moment, when she's about to be raped, that line is dissolved and we suddenly can see out into the exterior, which I thought was like, poof. But yeah, so that idea is, the contrast is shattered for a moment and foreshadows what's about to happen to Blanche. And I think that moment when she's raped, that is when her vision of what reality and fantasy is completely dissolved. And then that happens again, I think, later, whenever, she's taken away. And once that thing is, that idea is completely dissolved and all of her fantasies are dissolved, I think now she has to face the reality through what she knows best, which is creating a fantasy out of it. So yeah, because she says, her last line is, "I've always depended on the kindness of strangers." And, so I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. Music was a huge thing in this play, similar to Mother Courage, but this really pulls you in versus taking you out of it. I thought it was really beautiful at certain moments. The music would swell and have, an underlying meaning, which I think is another way that he really pushed this idea of selective realism with the music, with the lighting especially, and the shadow play and the voices and all the other things he included there near the end was absolutely evidence of this selective realism. But yeah, I think that's everything I have. Sorry that this is 15 minutes long. This was a very meaty play, and I even though it was horrible, I enjoyed it. So yeah.